She was called crazy, reckless, even delusional. A single mother who spent her last $750 on a forgotten ghost town in the middle of nowhere. People laughed, said she'd lost her mind. But within days, her purchase would uncover a secret that had been locked away for half a century, a secret worth $234 million. This is the story of how desperation, courage, and one impossible gamble changed everything. Before we begin, if you love unbelievable real-life stories about ordinary people who stumble into extraordinary situations, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will prove that sometimes the biggest risks reveal the greatest reward. When the auctioneer's hammer hit the table, the sound echoed through a nearly empty courthouse like a gunshot. $750. That was all it took for Emily Carter, a 33-year-old single mom of two, to buy an entire ghost town called Prospect Ridge. Population, 0. Buildings, 26. Hope, barely any. The few locals who attended the county tax sale whispered and snickered. A single mom buying a town? They muttered. She'll regret that before sunset. But Emily didn't care. To her, this wasn't madness, it was survival. A week earlier, she'd received her final eviction notice. Her apartment rent had doubled overnight, and the small auto repair job she worked barely kept food on the table for her and her sons, Ryan and Luke. Every option had dried up, until she saw the listing online. Abandoned property, Prospect Ridge Ghost Town. Minimum bid, $750. At first, it looked like a joke. The photos showed cracked buildings, a collapsed mine shaft, and a single paved street half buried in dust. But something about it pulled her in. Maybe it was the chance to start over. Maybe it was insanity. Either way, she placed her bid, and no one else wanted it. That's how Emily became the owner of a ghost town. When she arrived days later, her old pickup rattled down the dirt road toward the horizon. The air shimmered with desert heat, the silence almost unnatural. The first sight of Prospect Ridge was surreal, an empty main street lined with hollow buildings leaning into the wind. A saloon with shattered windows, a general store whose sign dangled from one chain, a church whose bell was frozen mid-swing with rust. For a long time, she just sat in the truck, hands gripping the wheel, trying to believe she actually owned all of this. The deed said she did. Every inch of it. She parked beside the only stone building in town, the old Prospect Ridge Savings and Loan Bank, its name still faintly visible above the cracked doorway. The town had been abandoned in the early 1970s, when the nearby copper mine dried up. Nobody had ever come back. She stepped out, her boots sinking into the powdery dust. The silence pressed against her ears. No birds. No wind. Just the faint creak of the bank's door moving on its rusted hinges. Inside, the air was stale and dry. Dust hung like fog in the light that streamed through the cracks. Papers lay scattered on the floor, ledgers, faded receipts, even an old calendar stuck on June 1971. And at the far end of the room, behind a wall of rusted bars, stood a massive steel vault door, easily 6 feet tall, its brass handle still gleaming under layers of grime. She couldn't explain why, but the sight made her heart beat faster. The bank's vault looked untouched, as if waiting for someone to open it again. Emily shook her head. She wasn't here to chase mysteries. She needed a place to live, maybe fix up a few buildings, maybe rent the site to tourists one day. That was the dream, not treasure hunts. Still, the vault's presence lingered in her mind like a whisper. That first night, she and her boys slept in the back of the pickup, wrapped in blankets beneath a sky crowded with stars. It was quiet, too quiet. She wondered what kind of lives had been lived here, what stories these buildings remembered. In the morning, she started cleaning out the old general store. The walls were solid enough. She figured it could become a home, a real roof over their heads instead of eviction notices and broken dreams. By afternoon, she'd found an old sign wedged behind the counter. It read, Prospect Ridge Savings and Loan, established 1905. a symbol of a town that once thrived, now dead. But as the sun set that evening, she noticed something odd. On the side of the bank, hidden beneath a collapsed awning, a faded U.S. Treasury emblem was carved into the stone, nearly invisible under dust and time. It wasn't just a local bank. Something about that symbol felt out of place, almost official, like the building had once been more than it seemed. That night she couldn't sleep. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers between walls. The vault, the emblem, the locked door, they wouldn't leave her mind. A memory flashed back to the auction clerk handing her the keys, dozens of them, labeled with worn metal tags. She hadn't noticed before, but one tag had read simply, Federal. The next morning, she tested the keys on the bank door. One fit perfectly. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. Dust swirled in beams of light. She approached the vault, her boots echoing on the stone floor. The dial was large brass, still intact. She ran her fingers over it, feeling faintly engraved numbers. The key labeled Federal was smaller, oddly shaped, heavier than the rest. Her instincts screamed not to. But curiosity and desperation overpowered fear. She slid the key into a narrow slit beneath the handle. It fit. When she turned it, a deep mechanical click echoed through the chamber, followed by a slow, low hum. Something inside the vault began to move. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sound of grinding gears filled the room, followed by a faint metallic sigh, as if the vault had exhaled for the first time in decades. Emily stepped back. The door didn't open, not yet. But she saw a tiny light flicker above the lock, glowing faintly red. Whatever mechanism was inside had reactivated. She didn't know it yet, but that single motion, that one turn of an ancient key, had triggered a 50-year-old system designed to unlock something that was never meant to be found again. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it a strange metallic whistle that echoed through the hollow town. And for the first time, Emily felt it, the sensation of being watched in a place where no one should exist. The desert sun rose over Prospect Ridge like a burning coin, slicing through the ghost town's stillness. Emily hadn't slept much. All night she'd replayed the moment she turned that strange brass key and heard the ancient vault come alive. The sound hadn't left her mind. That click, that deep, hollow hum, felt like a heartbeat starting after decades of silence. She convinced herself it was just old machinery reacting to movement. But deep down, she knew something else had been triggered. Something mechanical or maybe historical. She spent the morning repairing the front of the general store, forcing herself to stay busy. Her boys, Ryan and Luke, explored the abandoned buildings nearby, laughing as their voices echoed through the empty town. For the first time in years, they were happy, even if their new home was made of dust and decay. Then, just after noon, the rumble of engines broke the stillness. 2 pickup trucks appeared at the edge of the highway, kicking up clouds of red dust as they crawled toward her. Emily froze, hammers still in hand. The locals, whoever they were, had arrived. The trucks rolled to a stop in front of the bank. 5 men climbed out, all wearing work boots, denim jackets, and expressions that weren't friendly. Their leader was an older man with skin weathered like old leather. He walked straight up to her, his boots crunching the gravel. They didn't need to speak. Their faces said enough. You don't belong here. The man stopped near the bank door, glancing toward the faint glow still visible through the dusty window, the light from the vault's indicator still flickering red. He looked at her like he already knew what she'd done. Without a word, he turned back toward his truck, scanning the whole town before muttering something under his breath to the others. The men climbed back into their vehicles, started their engines, and disappeared down the road as silently as they'd come. No confrontation, no welcome, just a wordless warning. But the message was clear. They knew this town's secret, and they wanted her gone. That night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of timber and whistle of wind made her jump. Her boys slept peacefully in the back of the truck, but she stayed awake, staring at the faint red glow inside the bank across the street. At 2 a.m., she heard it again, that same deep click. This time softer. Quicker. Like gears shifting inside the vault. She shined her flashlight toward the bank, the beam catching dust swirling in the darkness. Then she saw it. Faint condensation on the vault door. Cold air. The desert night was freezing, but this was something else. The kind of chill that came from inside. Emily forced herself to step back. She wasn't going to mess with it again. Not tonight. In the morning, she found boot prints, fresh ones, circling the bank's entrance. They weren't hers, and they weren't from the previous day's visitors. Someone had come during the night. Fear twisted into curiosity. Why were strangers sneaking around an abandoned town no one cared about? Determined to learn more, Emily drove to the nearest town, a tiny desert settlement called Dry Hollow, 30 miles away. The local diner was small, its walls covered with photos of mining days long gone. When she mentioned she'd bought Prospect Ridge, the chatter in the diner stopped. The waitress, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned in and said quietly, "You bought that place?" Emily nodded. The woman hesitated, then muttered, "People don't go near there anymore. Not since the vault." That word again. Vault. The waitress lowered her voice further. "My granddad worked there. Said when the mine closed in the 70s, the bank shut down overnight. Folks said there was federal gold kept in that vault from the war. But something went wrong. People died. And one night, the whole town just left." Emily's pulse quickened. "They just left." The woman shrugged. "Overnight. No goodbyes. Just dust and silence. Some said the vault was cursed. Others said the government sealed it after something terrible happened inside." Emily thanked her and left. But the words clung to her like static. Federal gold. People died. Cursed vault. On the drive back, she noticed something strange. One of the same pickup trucks that had visited her earlier was now following far behind, headlights dimmed. When she slowed, it slowed. When she sped up, it matched her. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The long desert highway stretched empty in every direction. No police, no traffic, just dust and fear. She didn't drive straight into Prospect Ridge. Instead, she pulled off early, taking the old mining access road behind the ridge. It wound through the hills and brought her into the town from the rear. From there, she killed her headlights and waited, watching from the shadows. 10 minutes later, the truck rolled into town and stopped in front of the bank. Its lights stayed off, but she could see two figures climb out, flashlights flickering. They entered the bank through the side door she'd left open. Her heart pounded. Whoever they were looking for something. And whatever it was inside that vault. A few minutes later, one of the flashlights flickered violently, then went out. The other light dropped to the floor. A metallic clang echoed through the building. Then silence. Emily waited, breath frozen. No one came out. When dawn broke, she finally worked up the courage to approach. The truck was gone. But the bank door was wide open, and inside, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 2 sets of muddy footprints led to the vault, but only one set led away. And on the floor in front of the vault door was the key she'd used. The brass key marked Federal, bent completely in half like someone had tried to break it in the lock. Whatever was inside that vault, someone didn't want it opened. Morning sunlight crept across Prospect Ridge, revealing a layer of fine red dust on everything. But what caught Emily's attention was the bank door, hanging slightly ajar like a wound that refused to close. She approached cautiously, her every step echoing across the silent street. The air inside felt heavier than before, colder too. The bent brass key still lay on the floor, twisted as if crushed by impossible force. The footprints from the night before were still visible, leading straight to the vault. The steel door remained shut, but faint wisps of frost clung to its edges. It was as though something behind that door had frozen time itself. Emily leaned in, listening. Nothing. Just the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling. She told herself it was ridiculous, that her imagination was feeding her fear, but the tension in her chest wouldn't ease. She backed out of the bank and bolted the door. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She locked her truck, gathered her sons, and drove away from the ghost town. But she didn't get far. 10 miles down the highway, the truck died. The engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent. The gauges went dark. No signal. No radio. Just stillness. The air outside shimmered with heat. No other vehicles. No sound except the faint hum of wind over sand. She popped the hood, but the battery looked fine. Something had drained the truck completely, as if every ounce of power had been pulled from it. Her sons sat quietly in the cab, sensing her fear. She told them it was fine, but her stomach twisted. When she finally got the truck restarted 2 hours later, she drove straight back to Dry Hollow. At the small county records office, she asked to see any documentation on Prospect Ridge. The clerk, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, looked confused at first. "That place," he muttered. "You own it now?" She nodded. He disappeared into the back room for a while, then returned with a thick folder coated in dust. "You're the first person to ask about this in decades." Inside the folder were property deeds, mining reports, and one thin envelope stamped Federal Confidential, 1973. It wasn't sealed. She slid the letter out carefully. The paper was yellowed and fragile, typed in faint ink. Following the unexplained deaths of 3 bank employees at Prospect Ridge Savings and Loan, this office recommends immediate closure of the facility pending federal retrieval. Access to vault strictly prohibited until authorization from Washington, D.C. is received. 3 death. A sealed vault. Federal retrieval that never happened. Emily's pulse quickened. She flipped the page and found another document, a requisition order from the U.S. Treasury Department, dated 1945, indicating that a shipment of gold had been temporarily stored in rural Nevada banks during World War II. One of the listed facilities, Prospect Ridge Savings and Loan. Her mind raced. Gold. Real gold. Not legend, not rumor. The vault might contain what the government had hidden and forgotten nearly 80 years ago. But if that was true, why had 2 men tried to access it last night? And why had one of them not come out? She closed the file and thanked the clerk, leaving with her thoughts spinning. If she'd stumbled onto a lost federal deposit, she couldn't just claim it. But she couldn't ignore it either. That night, she returned to Prospect Ridge under the same stars that had once lit the miner's way home. Her headlights cut across the hollow street, revealing the outlines of crumbling buildings and shadows that seemed to move on their own. She parked near the general store. Her boys were asleep in the back seat, unaware of the storm building around their mother. Emily walked toward the bank, flashlight trembling in her hand. The lock she'd bolted earlier was broken, snapped clean through. Inside, the smell was stronger now, not rot, not decay, but something metallic, like the tang of blood mixed with old iron. Her flashlight beam danced across the floor until it hit something shiny. A badge. Faded, scratched, but still legible. It read, U.S. Department of Treasury, Field Security Division. One of the men who'd come last night wasn't a local. He'd been government. The vault door loomed at the back, its faint red light now blinking faster. Once every few seconds, then twice, then a steady glow. She approached slowly, watching frost form in small spiderwebs across the steel. The hum was louder now, like distant machinery warming up. And then she saw it, an inscription near the base of the door, half covered by grime. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. Automated security lock. Time release. 50 years. 50 years. Her heart froze. The bank had closed in 1973. That meant the vault was set to unlock in 2023. She looked at her phone. The date. October 22, 2023. The timer had expired. The vault wasn't locked anymore, it was waking up. Emily staggered backward as the red light turned green. A deep, heavy thunk echoed from inside the mechanism, followed by a slow grinding as the vault door's outer wheel began to turn on its own. Dust shook from the ceiling. The entire building seemed to breathe. She ran outside, grabbing her sons from the truck. They barely had time to ask what was happening before she shouted for them to get behind the general store. Then, with a final deep rumble, the vault door cracked open. The sound was deafening, metal grinding against metal after half a century of silence. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out, carrying with it a smell of old earth and something else, something electric. Emily's flashlight trembled in her hand. The door had opened only a few inches. Through the narrow gap she saw something glitter, faint, dull gold reflecting the light. Gold bars. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. But beneath that shimmer she thought she saw something else, a shape. A shape that didn't move. The air around the vault seemed to vibrate, like static before a lightning strike. The ground beneath her boots trembled lightly. Her sons clung to her legs, eyes wide with fear. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to run. But another instinct, the one that had driven her to buy a ghost town for $750, whispered, "You've come too far to stop now." The vault door groaned again, widening another inch, then fell silent, as if it had reached its limit. The green light blinked once more, then went dark. The vault was open, but just enough to see the past staring back. Inside that sliver of darkness, something waited, untouched for 50 years. And somewhere in the distance, another engine rumbled. Someone else was coming. The sound of the engine grew louder, echoing through the empty desert canyons. Emily's breath caught as headlights flickered over the horizon. Whoever was coming, they were coming fast. She grabbed her sons and ducked behind the crumbling wall of the general store. The truck roared into town, screeching to a halt in front of the bank. Two men jumped out, both in dark clothing, carrying flashlights and something heavier on their belt. Government. Again. The taller man scanned the building with a military stance, while the other pulled out a small radio and muttered codes Emily couldn't make out. The taller one moved to the vault door and stared at the green light that had just gone dark. Then he said something that froze her blood. "It's open." Emily pressed her sons close, her heart slamming in her chest. The men entered the bank cautiously, guns drawn. Their flashlights cut through the dust, illuminating the gaping vault. For several minutes there was silence, then one of the men shouted, "My God, it's all here!" A metallic clatter followed, the sound of gold bars hitting the concrete floor. Emily risked a glance. Through a hole in the store wall she could see them, the vault now fully open, gold stacked like bricks of sunlight. Each bar stamped with the seal of the United States Treasury. There had to be hundreds, maybe thousands. The second man began taking photos, his flashlight gliding over the stacks. But as he stepped further inside, something odd happened. His radio crackled violently, then died. The air seemed to thicken, vibrating with low static. The men exchanged a glance. Then the lights flickered. The taller man called out, but the sound distorted, like a voice underwater. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost crawled along the steel walls. Emily's skin prickled. Something was wrong inside that vault. One of the men stumbled backward, clutching his head. "What the hell?" The rest of his sentence dissolved into static. The light from his flashlight bent, as if the air itself had warped around it. Then came the noise. A low, resonant hum, deep enough to rattle the windows of the bank. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, ancient. Emily couldn't see clearly, but something inside the vault seemed to shift. The stacks of gold cast strange, moving shadows, though there was no light source to create them. The man nearest the door tried to run, but the vault slammed shut with a force that shook the entire town. The sound echoed for miles. Emily's sons screamed. She pulled them close, shielding them from the dust cloud that followed. When silence returned, only one figure stumbled out, the shorter agent, his face pale as bone. He didn't look back. He ran straight to the truck, jumped in, and tore down the road, leaving the other man, and the vault, behind. Emily waited until the sound of the truck faded. Then she crept toward the bank. The air around the building felt wrong. Static tingled across her skin. Inside, her flashlight beam wavered, cutting through the haze. The vault door was sealed again. No sound, no movement. Just the faint smell of ozone and metal. On the floor near the entrance lay a single object, a file folder dropped by the fleeing man. Its label read, Project Reserve, Federal Gold Relocation, Confidential. Inside were faded black and white photographs, the same vault but decades earlier. Men in suits standing proudly before stacks of gold. The notes beneath the photos were chilling. Reserve 71, relocation of unregistered wartime deposit. Containment required. Radiation anomaly detected. Secure indefinitely. Emily's breath hitched. Radiation anomaly? She flipped to the last page. A memo dated 1973 read, Do not reopen vault. Exposure event suspected. Facility evacuated. Seal under Federal Code 12A until 2023 expiration. Her blood ran cold. The vault hadn't been sealed for protection, it had been quarantined. Whatever was stored with that gold wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. Emily's mind raced. She thought of the frost, the hum, the strange magnetic pull that had drained her truck's battery. The cold air seeping out like a living thing. She looked back at the vault door. It stood silent, massive, ancient, a tomb of wealth and warning. She realized something terrifying. The countdown wasn't designed to open the vault after 50 years. It was designed to contain whatever was inside for that long. And the lock had just expired. Emily backed away, her heart hammering. She gathered her sons, threw what supplies she could into the truck, and drove. Hard. Fast. But even as she raced down the desert road, she felt it, a faint vibration through the steering wheel, a hum that seemed to follow them. When she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw the faintest glow rising from the center of Prospect Ridge, a pale golden light pulsing from the old bank. Something had awakened. She didn't know what it was yet, but she knew it wasn't gold alone. Emily drove through the desert like the wind was chasing her. The headlights cut tunnels through the darkness, but the glow behind her wouldn't fade. It shimmered faintly on the horizon, a pulse of light where the ghost town used to sleep. Her sons sat silently in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, watching the golden shimmer rise and fall like a heartbeat. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Every instinct said run. 30 miles later, she rolled into Dry Hollow just before dawn and stopped outside the sheriff's station. Her hands trembled as she explained what she'd seen, the vault, the government agents, the strange light. The deputy on duty stared at her for a long moment, then made a single call. Within an hour, 3 unmarked SUVs rolled into town. Federal plates. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, badges flashing under the early sun. The lead investigator introduced himself only as Agent Cole. His tone carried no warmth, only procedure. They asked for directions, coordinates, and whether anyone else had entered the site. Emily watched as they drove off toward Prospect Ridge. By noon, the desert sky had turned a bruised yellow. Helicopters thundered overhead, followed by armored trucks carrying portable barriers and white hazard tent. From the highway, she saw the convoy stop at the edge of the ghost town. Something huge was happening. Something no one would ever talk about. She waited at a diner on the outskirts, clutching a cup of coffee she never drank. Hours passed. Then the news started spreading through whispers and static radio chatter. Restricted zone established, hazardous containment in progress. That night, the desert glowed again. Brighter this time, a slow-moving haze spreading over the ridge. When morning came, she returned to the perimeter. A temporary fence had gone up, manned by soldiers wearing radiation badges and respirators. She demanded answers, but the only thing they told her was to stay back. Still, she caught glimpses beyond the tents, men in white suits carrying lead containers, Geiger counters clicking like angry insects. Later that afternoon, Agent Cole finally emerged. His face was pale under the desert dust. He told her the official version: residual radiation from abandoned mining equipment, no danger to civilians. But his eyes told a different story, the eyes of a man who'd seen something he couldn't explain. He handed her a sealed envelope. "For your records," he said, voice low. "Ownership transfer and compensation for federal reclamation." She opened it later and stared at the figure. $234 million. Her breath caught. It wasn't a reward, it was a buyout. The federal government had just purchased the entire ghost town, every inch of it, under emergency powers. The message was clear: walk away and stay silent. That night, back in the small motel, she couldn't sleep. The boys were safe beside her, but her mind replayed every detail: the hum, the frost, the warped light. If the radiation story were true, why did their equipment glow green instead of yellow? Why the heavy shielding? Why the fear in their voices? She searched the internet, diving into archived federal records and declassified war files. Buried deep in a 1950s document, she found a phrase that made her stomach twist. Project Reserve, electromagnetic containment of anomalous isotope. The description matched the vault design exactly. The gold bars weren't just storage, they were part of a containment field. Layers of conductive metal used to trap unstable energy from an experimental war-era power source. The gold was a barrier. And when the time lock expired, that barrier weakened. The hum she'd heard wasn't a machine coming to life. It was something escaping. By the end of the week, Prospect Ridge vanished from map. Satellite images blurred, digital listings deleted. The government erased the town like it had never existed. But Emily couldn't forget. She started noticing strange effects. Her phone flickered near anything metallic, compasses spun, and sometimes, at night, her younger son woke screaming that the walls were glowing. She knew she should walk away. She had the money, the security, the freedom. Yet something inside her couldn't let it go. Because buried under the fear was a single, haunting question. If the gold was meant to contain something, what was that something? 2 months later, she got her answer. A plain envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph, taken through a hazmat visor. The image showed the open vault, empty shelves, and on the concrete floor, a perfect human-shaped shadow burned into the stone. No explanation. Just one sentence typed on the back. Containment failed at 0300 hours. That night, the lights in her motel flickered. The radio crackled with faint static, a pulse that rose and fell in the same rhythm as the hum she'd heard in the vault. Whatever had been sleeping under Prospect Ridge wasn't gone. It was awake. And somehow, it was following the woman who had turned the key. 3 months after the government sealed Prospect Ridge, the desert was quiet again, too quiet. The fences were gone, the tents dismantled, and official statements claimed the containment incident was fully resolved. But Emily knew better. The $234 million deposit had appeared in a temporary federal account under her name. Along with it came a legal gag order and a one-line instruction. Funds released under Property Recovery Act Section 12. No explanation. No meeting. Just money, more than she could imagine. She moved her family to the outskirts of Reno, bought a modest house, and tried to pretend everything was normal. Yet at night, when the wind howled, she could still hear that low mechanical hum echoing through her skull like a memory that wouldn't die. It started small. Static on the radio, lights dimming when she walked by, her phone vibrating without messages. Then came the dreams. She'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, images of the vault flashing behind her eyelids, gold bars shimmering like liquid fire, and something moving between them. Each morning she'd tell herself it was trauma. The mind invents things when it can't explain the past. But deep down, she knew the truth. The vault had changed her. 2 weeks later, the first incident hit the news. A wildlife drone captured footage of a glowing ring expanding over the Prospect Ridge Valley. Officials blamed an atmospheric reflection. Scientists called it rare luminescence. Emily knew the pulse pattern instantly. It matched the rhythm of the vault's hum. Her chest tightened. Whatever energy had been sealed there wasn't dormant. It was spreading. She transferred most of the money into multiple trusts for her sons, leaving only a small fraction accessible. Then she drove back toward the desert, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had once made her turn that key. At mile marker 147, her car electronics cut out again, just like before. The compass spun, the GPS died. Ahead, the empty road shimmered with heat distortion, but when she stepped out, the air wasn't hot. It was charged. Tiny arcs of blue static danced across the sand, humming in harmony with her heartbeat. She climbed a ridge and saw it. Prospect Ridge reborn, half buried in dust yet faintly lit from within, as if the town itself glowed. The bank stood intact, its roof collapsed inward, and through the broken wall came a faint golden pulse. She moved closer, every instinct screaming to stop. Yet the air felt alive, whispering her name through the static. Inside the ruin, the vault door had melted outward, edges warped like wax. The gold was gone, vaporized or transformed, but in its place hovered a sphere of light, no larger than a basketball, pulsing gently. She realized the bars hadn't just contained the energy. They'd fed it, each one acting as a conductor until the vault became a living reactor. And when she'd opened it, she'd given it release. The light shimmered, shifting colors, white, amber, deep blue. Then it stilled, hovering inches from her face. She braced for pain, for heat, for radiation, but instead felt warmth, recognition. In that moment, her memories flashed, every failure, every night of fear, every desperate choice. The hum aligned with her heartbeat, syncing perfectly. A thought, not words, entered her mind: you are the key. The realization hit like lightning. The time lock hadn't been mechanical, it was biological. The containment system had been built to recognize the descendant or genetic match of someone who had once worked there. That's why it had opened when she touched it. She must have been connected to one of the original employees. Her hands shook. She remembered the name on the old documents: Hartley, Chun, Morrison, and one more on the deed transfer: Eleanor Carter Hartley. Her great-grandmother. She wasn't a random buyer. She'd been pulled here by blood. The sphere pulsed brighter, spinning faster until the light fractured into streams that raced outward through cracks in the walls. Energy lines shot beneath the sand toward the abandoned town, each one striking a building and igniting it with faint golden light. In seconds, the ghost town lit up like a constellation, every structure alive, every wire buzzing with a hum she recognized from her dreams. She stepped outside, tears streaming down her face. The power didn't feel destructive. It felt restorative. The town that had died decades ago seemed to breathe again. Then the ground shook. Dust rose in massive spirals, the wind shrieking like a siren. The golden light brightened until the horizon vanished. Emily fell to her knees, shielding her eyes. When the wind calmed and she looked again, Prospect Ridge stood renewed, fresh paint, intact roofs, glass glinting under sunlight. Time itself had reversed. But there were no people, no sounds. Just the hum, softer now, like a heartbeat fading to rest. The vault energy had rebuilt what greed destroyed, spending the last of its force to restore the town instead of consuming it. And now it was dying. Emily stood in the quiet street, overwhelmed by awe and terror. She realized the $234 million wasn't payment, it was collateral. The government knew the vault would reactivate and had bought her silence to keep her away when it happened. But fate had other plans. As the last glow faded, she whispered a promise into the still air. She'd rebuild the town for real this time, with her own hands, not federal secrets. That night she camped beside the reborn general store, listening to the desert settle. For the first time in months, there was no hum, no fear, only peace. She didn't know if the energy was gone or merely sleeping, but she understood now why it had chosen her. The vault hadn't cursed her. It had passed its burden on. And Emily Carter intended to make sure its gift became a legacy, not a weapon. When the sun rose over Prospect Ridge the next morning, the ghost town no longer looked like a ruin. The streets were sharp and defined, the buildings upright and unbroken, their windows glinting with light that shouldn't exist. Emily stood in the middle of Main Street, disoriented and awestruck. Every board, every brick had been restored to its prime. The paint on the hotel's balcony rail gleamed. The church bell swayed gently in the morning breeze. Even the old general store's sign, once a warped skeleton of wood, now read clearly, Prospect Ridge Mercantile. It was as though the town had been plucked straight from 1950 and set back on the earth untouched by time. Her sons woke to the impossible sight and ran from the truck, laughter echoing through the quiet. They didn't understand the miracle, they only saw a home finally come to life. Emily tried to make sense of it. The light from the vault had spread outward in geometric patterns, almost like circuitry beneath the ground. It had connected every building before collapsing in silence. Whatever energy she'd released hadn't just reanimated wood and steel, it had restored memory, reconstructing everything as it had once been. But the silence felt strange. The air was too still, as though the town was waiting for her to act. She walked into the bank first. The vault was gone, completely gone, as if it had been erased from existence. In its place lay a shallow crater, smooth and blackened, the stone surface rippling like melted glass. Embedded at its center was a single gold bar, glowing faintly under the dust. She picked it up carefully. It was cool, almost alive, the faint hum returning at her touch. A symbol burned into its surface, not the treasury seal this time, but something older. A geometric mark resembling an infinity loop, simple yet endless. She pocketed it without knowing why. Over the next week, Emily rebuilt life from the silence. She repaired wiring, drew power from solar panels, and restocked supplies from nearby towns. The money she'd kept from the federal transfer became her fuel. Tools, wood, paint, water, everything the reborn town needed. Within a month, the place began to change again, not through energy but through effort. She turned the hotel into temporary housing, the general store into a workshop. Visitors began to arrive, drawn by rumors that a woman had restored a ghost town overnight. At first, they were journalists chasing a miracle story. Then came wanderers, artists, families looking for a new start. Emily let them stay, no questions asked. She didn't mention the vault or the energy or the night the desert glowed. She simply told them, this town deserves a second chance. And people believed her. Soon Prospect Ridge buzzed with new life, hammering, laughter, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the old diner. For the first time in 50 years, Main Street was alive again. But at night, when everyone slept, Emily would walk the edge of town and listen. Beneath the sand, faint vibrations hummed like a heartbeat still buried underground. The light that had rebuilt the town hadn't vanished. It had gone dormant. She noticed it first when a storm rolled in one evening. The air crackled, lightning flashing against the hills. As rain hammered the rooftops, the ground beneath her boots began to shimmer faintly gold. The pattern spread in veins across the dirt, lighting up the street in silent pulses. And then the hum grew stronger, slow, deep, rhythmic. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't natural either. It sounded like breath. She realized the vault's energy hadn't died, it had fused with the land. The entire valley had become its vessel. By morning, the light was gone again, leaving behind damp streets and a subtle scent of metal. But something new stood at the town's edge. A marker stone, half buried, etched with the same infinity symbol she'd seen on the gold bar. The pattern wasn't random. It was deliberate, designed. The vault's creators hadn't built a weapon. They'd built a seed. The gold, the containment, the energy, it was all part of a restoration system meant to preserve the past. A time capsule of history and memory, activated only when destruction reached its peak. And Emily had been the one chosen to awaken it. Over the following months, the town grew into a symbol of renewal. Documentaries called her the woman who rebuilt time. Scholars studied the architecture that seemed both modern and ancient. Tourism exploded, and with it, prosperity. But Emily never allowed greed to touch Prospect Ridge again. Every dollar earned went back into preservation, community gardens, art spaces, housing for families who'd lost everything elsewhere. She had transformed a ghost town into a living legacy. Still, one mystery lingered. The gold bar she'd kept continued to pulse faintly, especially on nights when the stars burned brightest. She'd learned to live with its quiet glow, storing it in the rebuilt bank's display case, like a relic of the miracle that started it all. Then, one evening near dusk, she noticed something new. The symbol on the bar had changed. The loop had split into two circles, one fading, one bright. And just below it, a thin line of new text shimmered briefly before disappearing again. It read, Phase 1 complete. Emily froze. If there was a Phase 1, there had to be a Phase 2. And somewhere beneath Prospect Ridge, something ancient had already started counting down again. The discovery of the words, Phase 1 complete, marked the end of peace in Prospect Ridge. 4 days afterward, Emily couldn't focus. She replayed the message again and again, her mind racing through possibilities. Phase 1 had rebuilt the town, restored the past, and given her a second chance. But what was Phase 2? Whatever it was, the gold bar pulsed brighter each night, the light spreading further through the display case. She measured the intervals, realizing with a sinking feeling that it was no random flicker, it was a countdown. 60 pulses per hour, then 50, then 45. The town was alive again, full of people and laughter, but the energy beneath the surface was stirring once more. Emily couldn't tell anyone. How could she explain that the very ground they lived on was ticking like a time bomb of unknown origin? She tried to destroy the bar. She took it outside the bank one evening, wrapped it in thick cloth, and swung a sledgehammer with all her strength. The sound that followed wasn't shattering, it was music. A deep metallic tone that resonated across the desert, echoing from mountain to mountain. When the echo faded, she saw the impossible. Every light in Prospect Ridge flickered in perfect sync, the same rhythm as the bar's pulse. Then came the whisper, a low, steady vibration that carried through her bones, forming thoughts she couldn't shut out. Phase 2, integration. She fell to her knees. The vault's energy wasn't done. It was spreading through the land, and now, it was reaching for its next host. That night, she dreamed again. But this time, she wasn't outside the vault, she was inside it. Walls of gold surrounded her, shifting and alive. The hum wasn't distant anymore, it came from within her chest. The light wasn't around her, it was her. She woke gasping, the golden glow faintly visible under her skin, tracing her veins like liquid fire. Whatever had been trapped in that vault had chosen her completely. The next morning, tremors shook the valley. Locals panicked, thinking it was an earthquake, but Emily knew better. She felt the pulse match her heartbeat, every vibration aligned with her. The system was awakening again, this time through her body. She locked herself inside the bank, sealing the doors. If the energy was going to consume her, she wouldn't let it destroy everyone else. She'd started this, she'd end it. From the window, she watched the townspeople gather in fear. They didn't know what was happening, only that their savior was now their storm. The gold bar in the case melted into pure light, rising like a flame. It hovered in front of her, spinning rapidly, its glow matching the one now radiating from her hands. Then she understood. Phase 2 wasn't destruction, it was transfer. The energy was evolving, seeking a living vessel to preserve itself indefinitely. The town's restoration was only the beginning, she was meant to become its guardian. Emily stepped forward. The light enveloped her completely, heatless but heavy, wrapping around her like silk. Her vision filled with fragments of memory. Miners, bankers, soldiers, all the people who had once lived here, their lives flickering through her like sparks in a storm. She saw their laughter, their struggles, their final day when the vault sealed shut. Every soul, every echo, every dream of the town had been preserved in the containment field. It wasn't radiation. It was remembrance. And now the system was giving it back, all of it, through her. Outside, the people of Prospect Ridge saw the bank erupt in golden light, rising into the sky like a sunrise. Windows shattered, wind howled, and the ground shook, but then, just as suddenly, everything fell silent. When the light faded, Emily was gone. In her place, at the center of the bank, stood a crystalline structure resembling the infinity symbol, glowing softly. The air felt alive but calm. The tremors stopped. The hum ceased. Over the next few weeks, the townspeople rebuilt what little damage remained. They spoke of her in hushed tones. The single mother who had bought a forgotten ghost town for $750 and turned it into a miracle. They never understood where the wealth came from, or how the town survived when every map said it didn't exist. But every night, as dusk fell, the infinity symbol glowed faintly in the heart of the bank, casting warm light across the rebuilt main street. Some said it was electricity. Others said it was faith. But those who stayed long enough to listen closely could still hear a faint hum beneath the ground, slow, steady, eternal. The heartbeat of Prospect Ridge. And somewhere beyond comprehension, Emily Carter watched over it all, not as a victim of the vault, but as its keeper. The woman who turned the key. The one chosen to remember. The single mom who saved a town and became its soul.